his partner and Shelby. Be with them and bless them and help us to support him and be with Preston now as he brings the word of life to us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, Tom.
It's easy to sum it up when you just talk about practice. We sitting here, I'm supposed to be the franchise player, and we're in here talking about practice. I mean, listen, we talking about practice. Not a game, not a game, not a game. We talking about practice. Not a game. Not the game that I go out there and die for and play every game like it's my last. Not the game. We're talking about practice, man. I mean, how silly is that? And we're talking about practice. I know I'm supposed to be there. I know I'm supposed to lead by example. I know that. And I'm not shoving it aside, like it don't mean anything. I know it's important. I do. I honestly do. But we talking about practice, man. What are we talking about? Practice. We're talking about practice, man. We're talking about practice. We're talking about practice. We ain't talking about the game. We're talking about practice, man. When you come in the arena and you see me play, don't you? You see me give everything I got, right? But we talking about practice right now. We talking about practice. Man, look, I hear you. It's funny to me too. I mean, it's strange to me too. But we talking about practice, man. We're not even talking about the game, the actual game, when it matters. We talking about practice.
Possible though that from where he's coming from.
This morning we're talking about practice. No. Some of you I could tell, like that's the last thing you thought you would see this morning was the Allen Iverson practice rant. For those of you who don't know, that's Allen Iverson. He's retired now from the NBA, but was a basketball player. Played many years, was a great player. Pound for pound, probably one of the greatest ever. But I remember watching this interview. This came out in 2002. I was 12 years old, and I was watching this, and it just like exploded. Like it was really before like Twitter and all that, so it didn't really go viral, but it was all over ESPN, like played over and over again. And many of you that know Allen Iverson, like when I say that name, that's initially what you think of, and I'm the same way. But I remember they were talking about this interview, and analysts were analyzing it, and they discussed it. And what happened was, as a 12-year-old, my whole perception of who he was became based off this interview. I thought he was a guy that obviously didn't care much about practice, and obviously because of that, like didn't care about his teammates, and really to a point had disrespected the game of basketball. And that, because of this 1 minute and a half clip, was my whole perception, whole understanding of who he was. I didn't have the whole picture. And about a month ago, so I thought that for like 12 years, and about a month ago I was scrolling through the channels and I saw there was a documentary on TV about Allen Iverson, and I was like, I'll give it a watch. So I watched it, and they were right in this point of his life. And what I figured out is I had totally misunderstood what was going on here. This interview, it was taken right after a game or a practice, and they were asked the question, why had you missed one practice? And if you can go back and you can watch the full interview, what you understand is this was totally taken out of context. What he had said is in the prior interview is one of my best friends was just shot and killed. And basically what I'm trying to tell you is in life, like basketball and practices, they're not that important. And I think all of us can kind of agree with that in life, like there's things that are bigger than sports, but we kind of miss that when we don't have the whole story. And I thought to myself, man, I have really misunderstood who he is. And some of us in here, we've been misunderstood in our life, and we know the terrible feeling that is to be misunderstood. Maybe not to the extent he was, but I've kind of been misunderstood. Believe it or not, it's kind of weird, but I'm actually a pretty quiet and shy person, and sometimes really awkward. And just this past Wednesday, I was getting my hair cut, and I was quiet and awkward, and I just not very talkative. And so she's like, what's going on? Are you having a bad day? Do you hate the haircut? And I'm like, no, I'm just quiet. And so many times my quietness is misunderstood for being rude or angry or even stuck up. And I've had to combat that my whole life. And sometimes we're just misunderstood because we don't have the full story. We only have a small part of someone's life, and we totally can misunderstand them. I remember another time I was misunderstood because people sometimes have assumptions about us before they know us. I was, my freshman year, we were moving to a new town. I was going to a new school, and my brother was going to be a senior in high school. I was going to be a freshman. But like we were moving to a small town, and if you've lived in a small town, you'll know that like rumors just fly like wildfire, right? And so this rumor, I don't know where it came from, it gets spread that 2 senior boys, twins, are moving to this high school, and man, they're tall and they're athletic, they're gorgeous, and I promise, like I didn't spread this rumor. And I get to the school like not even knowing this, and people had assumptions and expectations of me that just weren't true. And so like, oh, you're gonna be a freshman? Oh, you really don't even play those sports? Like, oh, and it's just this terrible feeling to be misunderstood. And as Christians, it's the same way, right? So many times people, when we say we're Christians, they automatically think this, and this is true about us. When a lot of the times, all those things aren't true. And you want to tell them, like, that's not the case. I'm not that way. And there's so many misconceptions, misunderstandings about us as Christians. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to kind of investigate this. And so I got a team of our youth group boys together, and we went through Destin, and we went to Destin Commons, Harbor Walk Village, we went to the beaches, and we started doing street interviews. And we did some street interviews to get some feedback. Like, are there really misconceptions about Jesus, God, religion, the church, and Christians? And what we found is there's misconceptions about all those things out there. We made this really cool video. It was clever. It was great. Illustrated the point great. The only problem is we get it ready to upload to YouTube, and somehow it gets deleted. And so we don't have that video for you this morning. I wish we did because it was cool. But I found a video on YouTube that's very similar. So I want to show it this morning and show you how grave some of these misconceptions about Christians are.
Hopeful, on their part. They're hoping for something they're not going to get, I believe. Psycho, uneducated, backward, the South. I think of somebody that's possibly just a little bit overboard, a little bit extreme.
My Uncle Bob, conservative, white.
Fanatical. White covers.
Crazy.
People who wear white and like kind of glow but are kind of freaky. Yeah, and taxes?
I think there's a lot of stigmas attached to that word.
I can't answer that. Crazy?
Frightening.
Yeah.
Just overpowering. Yeah. You don't want to know. Somewhat scary. Maybe a little rigid in their dogma and their philosophy.
Nothing too good.
Maybe for some of us that's kind of a shot in the gut, but I think a lot of us have heard some of this before in our lives. We've heard some of these misconceptions, these misunderstandings. I mean, when we did our investigation, when we did our video, we saw a lot of the same responses. And it would blow us away how some people viewed Christians, how some people viewed God, how some people viewed Jesus. And so what I wanted to do this morning is I wanted to take some of these misconceptions and I want to dig into them, and I want to see ways we can combat these in our world and in our culture. I really wanted to look at like 5 of these. We're only going to have time for 2 this morning, but I want to go ahead and dive into some of these. The first misconception we're going to look at is one that people have, and it's that they think the goal of a Christian is to argue with and judge others. To argue with and judge others, and to a point, we've probably earned some of these, right? And maybe not us personally, but I feel like all of us know some Christians that are just way too argumentative. They just love to argue about stuff way too much. And on the other hand, some of us know Christians that are way too judgmental. And they spend way too much time just judging others. And sometimes we see this in our world, and we see their interactions with the world. We want to kind of just get in the middle and say, like, I promise you we're not that way. Like God is not about judging and arguing you, and Jesus isn't about that. And really Christians, we're not about that. So we have to find ways to combat some of these misconceptions. And one thing we saw, and one thing you'll see is people in our world, they view God in a pretty, and Jesus at least, in a pretty good light, but Christians not so much. So we have to, for some reason, Jesus was attractive to the world. We have to bridge that gap, partner with Jesus to figure out what it is we can do to show the world this isn't what we're about. This misconception isn't true. We're going to be in Matthew chapter 12 this morning. We're going to see how we can partner with Jesus to change this misconception. And I want to set some background. We're going to be starting verse 14 of Matthew chapter 12. And what's just happened in Matthew 12 that you'll see is Jesus has just healed a guy with a withered hand. And it's this awesome miracle. Everyone's pumped up. They're in awe. This is clearly a miracle from God, and they're praising Jesus, except there's one small group of people. Some of you have known them. They're the Pharisees. And the Pharisees says, we can't deny this is a miracle. But the problem is when you did this miracle, right? You performed this miracle on the Sabbath day. And on the Sabbath day, you're not allowed to work. And so this falls into category of work, apparently. And so you have broken the law. But I want you to check out responses. It goes even a little deeper than that. Verse 14. But the Pharisees went out and plotted how they might kill Jesus. You see, they went out from Jesus, you broke the law, to Jesus, we're going to kill you. Like a pretty big jump there, right? And so we understand there's a little more going on beneath the surface, a little more depth and background to this. And what this comes from is the Pharisees severely misunderstood who Jesus was. And severely misunderstood Jesus' purpose. See, they thought Jesus was going to come and pat them on the back and say, Pharisees, you've done such a good job. Like, y'all the ones that have kept the law. Like, man, let's set our kingdom up here. Let's raise you up. Let's exalt you. When that's not what happened at all, right? Jesus came to seek and save the lost. He spent time with the sinners and the outcasts, and He preached a gospel of love, grace, and mercy, and not legalism. And so they severely misunderstood who He was, and they understood that Jesus was a threat to their life. They said, man, what He does, it undermines our teaching, it undermines our livelihood. He's dangerous to us. We've got to get rid of Him. So they plot to kill Jesus. Check out Jesus' response to this in verse 15. So aware of this, Jesus withdrew from that place, and a large crowd followed Him. And He healed all who were ill. In verse 16, He warned them not to tell others about Him. I don't know about you, but if I had a miracle, if I somehow performed a miracle, I'd be telling everybody. It would be on Facebook. It would be on Instagram, Snapchat. You all would know about it. And, that's just kind of weird. It's kind of odd of Jesus to just perform a miracle because it's just more evidence that He is who He says He is. Every time He performs a miracle, it's evidence that He is the true Son of God. But He does something odd, and He says, y'all don't go and tell anyone. And I think Matthew, the writer, understands, this is odd. Because he tells us in verse 17, this is why I did it. I know you're probably, as the reader, this doesn't make sense. So he tells us, he says, verse 17, the reason he did this was to fulfill what was spoken through the prophet Isaiah. Verse 18, here is my servant whom I have chosen, the one I love, in him I delight. I will put my spirit on him, and he will proclaim justice to the nations. He will not quarrel or cry out. No one will hear his voice in the streets. A bruised reed he will not break, and a smoldering wick he will not snuff out, till he has brought justice through to victory. In verse 21, in his name the nations will put their hope. So we see this prophecy in Isaiah about Jesus. And basically what this prophecy in Isaiah says is, hey, this is what Jesus is about. This is who He's going to be. This is His ministry. This is His goals. This is Jesus. And it starts off by telling us a few things that Jesus isn't. He says what? Jesus will not come and quarrel. Arguing, that's not going to be His ministry. Is there times Jesus had to set people straight? Yes. But that's not what He was going to be known for. He says crying out, yelling, and judging. Was there time for righteous judgment? Yes. Was that what Jesus was about? No, absolutely not. He says He's not about arguing, not about bickering, not about fighting, not about judgment. So what is Jesus about? What is His main goal? What was His purpose to come? And it tells us in verse 21, I love this. He says, in His name, the nations will put their hope. Jesus came not to argue, not to fight, but to be a bringer of hope. To be a bringer of hope. Man, how awesome would it be if we watched a video on what people thought about Christians and they said, you know what they are? They're bringers of hope. Wouldn't that be so cool? That's the way the world thought of us. Man, this morning, if we want to combat the misconception that we're about arguing and judging, the only way to do that is to partner with Jesus and to be bringers of hope. But before we can understand how to become bringers of hope, first we have to have hope, right? We have to have hope in Jesus. And hope is one of those things in our culture that can seem hard to spot, hard to find, or hard to know if you really have it. Because we have so many things we can fall back on. We have securities and insurances and retirements and things that we feel safe with. And so it's in these only Jesus moments, as I like to call them, that we find if we really have hope. And let me describe what I mean by that. I was in church one time, and a guy comes up to give a report on this woman who had been battling cancer for many years. And he comes up, and it wasn't a good report. He says, she is now in a only Jesus moment. And what he meant by that is there's nothing I can do, there's nothing you can do, there's nothing the medical staff can do, only Jesus can save her. It's in these only Jesus moments where we figure out if we have hope or not. And some of us in the room, we felt these only Jesus moments. Maybe you were so far in sin where in your life you cried out and you knew that only Jesus could save you from that moment. Maybe you or someone you know has been super sick and on their deathbed and you said, only Jesus can save this person. Maybe your family's been in turmoil and things are going so bad, you know that the only way you can be saved from this moment is if Jesus comes into action. And what I love is that Jesus loves these moments. Like, Jesus loves the moments where only Him can come through, and He does. Man, it's in those moments we find hope. We find something to hold on to. It's that anchor that when the waves are strong, that holds us firm. I heard recently of this family. Their daughter was just super ill, and they were struggling in their faith. And the wife comes to the husband. She says, how can we have faith? How can we have hope? And he says one phrase. He says, the tomb was found empty. It's when everything else is falling apart, we have the truth to hold on to. When everything is slipping away, we can have hope in Jesus. And I hope this morning, if you don't have that hope, that you can find hope in Jesus. Because what you'll figure out is hope is powerful. Oh, hope is so powerful. I was reading a study done by psychologist, Dr. Dale Archer. And what he does, he works with hurricane victims. And he says, all the hurricane victims I've ever worked with, I can put them in two categories. He said, I can put them in psychological victims and psychological survivors. And he says they're very different. The psychological victims, they're stuck in their tragedy. They can't seem to move on. They can't seem to heal. They can't seem to find any optimism, no positive light, no light at the end of the tunnel. They're stuck in that tragedy. On the other hand, you have your psychological survivors, and there's still scars, and there's still pain, and there's still suffering, but there's also healing going on. And there's momentum, and there's a future, and there's a sense of optimism. And he says the only difference in these two groups, it's not economics, it's not finances, it's not race, it's not education. He says there's one difference, and it's hope. The psychological survivors have hope, and this group does not. Man, hope is so strong. Hope is so strong. And so once we have hope, we can then become sharers of hope. Okay? And now I want to just give you one way we become sharers of hope, bringers of hope. One, we partner with Jesus. And two, we don't give up on others. We simply don't give up on the people in our life. And for some of you, maybe that means a neighbor. Maybe you've been trying to proclaim to a neighbor and you say, hey, why don't you come see what church is like? Why don't you come figure out about this Jesus and figure out this hope that I have? And he pushes and pushes you away. We don't give up on that neighbor. Or maybe for some of you, it's the homeless guy, and we drive past him every day and we say, you know what? There's no way that guy is ever going to come to know Christ the way I know him. And we don't give up hope on people. Maybe it's the person in your family that struggles with drug addiction. And after relapse, we say there's just no hope left for them. We never give up hope people in our life. Maybe it's a family member that seems so far away of God, we've just written them off. And we don't give up on the people in our lives. And I remember when I was a teenager in the youth group, one activity we did is we would pull out an index card. And I remember I was probably 15 or 16, and our teacher told us to write 5 people in our lives that weren't baptized, didn't know Christ, and write down and just start praying for them. And pray that they come to know Christ in a special way. And for most of my life, that 5 on my list never changed. And I remember thinking to myself, like, man, some of these people, they're never going to get it. It's never going to click. And I don't even know, like, I was preparing for the sermon for a long time, but in the last month, literally 2 of those people on that list have been baptized and come to know Christ. Man, we don't give up on the people in our life. We don't give up hope because God has never given up hope on us. We can't be givers. We have to be givers of hope, not take it away from people. And one cool way we do this as a church family is we have a ministry that works with gives free medical care to the working uninsured. And basically there were 1,400 patients, and they bring them in and they say, hey, we're not here to argue, we're not here to judge, but we're simply here to give you hope, to give you free medical care. That's why they're properly named the Hope Medical Clinic. And I love their ministry, and I love what they do with Tim and Wanda and all the doctors and staff. They do such a great job of bringing hope to this community. Man, later on, it's the 5th Sunday, we're going to have a collection, and we can bring hope to our community by supporting them in a contribution this morning. Man, how can we bring hope to the community? We don't give up on people. We give hope, and we combat the misconception that we're about arguing and we're about judgment. Okay, let's move on to the second one. Second misconception is this. Second misconception is this, is that God exists to judge us. God exists to judge us. And when me and some of the boys from the youth group, we were making this video, we came across this one guy. We were on the beach, I think, and he didn't have a lot to say, but when we asked him, what's the first thing that comes to your mind when we say the word God? He was pretty sure on this one. He said, man, when I think about God, I think of a guy that sits up on his throne and he just waits on us to mess up and he just wants to beat us down. And every time we mess up, he's there just to beat us down. He says, oh, it's throughout the Bible. It's in there. I've read it. God just wants to beat us down. God exists to judge us. It's one of these grave misconceptions where we just want to sit and study with him right there and say, man, this isn't who God is. But the thing is, I think if we're honest with ourselves, to some extent, some of us have that same view still of who God is. This morning, I want to do an experiment. Okay, what I want you to do is I want everyone to close their eyes. Everyone, close your eyes, not for too long. Don't fall asleep. I want you to picture God is sitting right in front of you. I want you to picture God is sitting right in front of you. I want you to imagine the first thing that you think God would say to you. Imagine the first thing that God would say to you when He's sitting right in front of you. And for many of us in this room, we think the first thing God would say to us is a criticism. And for some of you, it may sound like this: hey, why are you still struggling with the same sin you've been struggling with your whole life? You've prayed and prayed and prayed, and you said you're going to get over it, but you're still stuck. You haven't matured, you haven't grown up, and you're still struggling with it. What's your deal? Why can't you get past it? And for some of you, it may sound like this: hey, why aren't you doing more for the kingdom? Why are you still not doing anything? Why aren't you bearing good fruit? Why aren't you doing more? Why aren't you evangelism? Why don't we get off our butts and do more? Some of us view God that way. You can open your eyes now. And for many of us, that's what it looks like. We have this idea that God wants to criticize us and bring us down, and we totally are missing it. We're totally missing it. Let's check this out some more. We're going to be in Matthew 14, so just 2 chapters over for this one. And what I want us to realize, guys, is how we view God changes everything. How you view God changes everything. A.W. Tozer, a great preacher and writer, once said this. He said, the thing that comes into your mind when you think about God is the most important thing about you. Let me say that again. The first thing that comes into your mind when you think about God is the most important thing about you. Basically saying how you view God changes everything, okay? And I want us to understand that this morning. We're going to read a story that many of you have heard. Matthew chapter 14, we'll start in verse 25. Jesus walking on water, okay? Verse 25, shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them, and He's walking on the lake. And when the disciples saw Him walking on the lake, they were terrified. It's a ghost, they said, and they cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, take courage, it is I, don't be afraid. Verse 28, Lord, if it's you, He replied, tell me to come on the water. Come, He said. Then Peter got down to the boat and walked on the water and came towards Jesus. And I love the story. Jesus had told the apostles, hey, I'm going to meet you on the other side. Go ahead and work that way. And Jesus comes out on the water and they think it's a ghost. And he can tell they're kind of afraid. So it's, hey, it's just me, guys. And I love Peter's response. See, Peter's the apostle that he just said whatever is on his mind. And he says, man, Jesus, you're walking on water. That's awesome. I want to try it too. So Jesus says, come on. And he starts walking towards Jesus, but then we see in verse 30 is where things go wrong. Verse 30 we see, but when he saw the wind, he was afraid to begin to sink. And he cried out, Lord, save me. Verse 31, immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. You have little faith, he said. Why did you doubt? And most of my life, the way I read this verse was something like this. I envisioned Jesus was just over Peter. He's looking at him, he's saying, Peter, what's your deal? What's your deal, man? You've been with me, you've seen miracles, you've seen healings. How do you not have doubt in me? When are you going to grow up? When are you going to get past this? When are you going to be mature as a Christian? Why can't you do better? Why can't you be better? And just this judgment and criticism and beating down of Peter. And many of us view God this way, that every time we fall, He's there to say, like, what's your deal? Why haven't you got past this? Why can't you grow up? Why can't you move on? Can't you be better? And I think we're totally missing it. I think we're totally missing it. What I think Jesus is really saying here is, Peter, you are walking on water. Like when you fully trust in me, when you keep your eyes on me, look at the awesome things you can do. Like, man, I have so much more to show you. I have so much more in life that if you fully trust in me, when your faith is the strongest, you're going to see some amazing things. Like John chapter 10, verse 10, he says what? I've came that they may have life and have it more abundantly. I didn't come here to judge you, Peter. I didn't come here to beat you down. Let me reach you up. Let me save you. Let me show you how awesome this life can be when you fully trust in me. Man, so many times, if we'll be like Peter and say, Lord, save me, and look up and view Him as someone that wants to love us and not judge us, what a difference it makes. See, what happens is when we view God as this dictator, the slave master, it leads to guilt, not grace. And guilt often will lead to separation from God. But when we view God as a loving Father, you know what it leads to? It leads to grace. And grace leads to worship. Check out verse 31 and 32 here. Verse 31 and 32, he says, when he reached out his hand, he caught him. You of little faith, he said, why did you doubt? And then they climbed in the boat and the wind died. But check out verse 33. Then those who were in the boat, which includes Peter, worshipped him, saying, truly, you are the Son of God. The grace leads to worship, where guilt leads to separation from God. And grace is so much more powerful than guilt, isn't it? I mean, we've experienced that in our life, that the grace is so much more strong. Growing up, I got in trouble, not a lot, but I got in some trouble. And we all remember that guilt feeling when we get in trouble. Like, we know we messed up, we know we screwed up, but there's nothing we can do. And sometimes that guilt will lead us to do the right thing, but sometimes it separates us, right? Sometimes that guilt tells us that, you know what, you've messed up too bad this time. There's nothing you can do. You've screwed up and you can't get back there. And it leads us from further and further away from God than where we need to be. I remember one time I was in trouble, and I'm not going to tell you what I did. My parents aren't going to tell you either, but I was grounded for the full summer. I was grounded for the entire summer, and I was devastated. And part of this grounding was, at the end of the year, our vacation, I couldn't bring my friend with me. And I'd already asked him to come. I had to call him and say, hey, man, you can't come. I've messed up. I knew I was in the wrong. I'd messed up. And the guilt was eating me up inside, but the guilt wasn't leading me to obedience. The guilt wasn't leading me to do better. But I'll never forget, at the end of the summer, my parents come to me and they're like, hey, you totally deserve this punishment, and you definitely haven't done anything to earn anything back. They said, we're going to allow you to bring your friend with you. And I'll never forget that moment of grace, love, and mercy, where it's like, I know I don't deserve this, but I'm so happy, and I just want to, in return, I just want to do something right and do something good. All of us have experienced that grace before, and that grace leads to worship. That grace leads to obedience, not our guilt. Not our guilt. I hope this morning that we view God in a way that shows grace and not guilt. Let me give you one more example of this. Me and Shelby were on the beach a couple weeks ago, and there was this little girl, and she was chasing the birds, and she wasn't getting close to catching them, but she had probably hadn't learned to walk too long, and she was chasing them. And the cool image was her dad was just following her around everywhere she went, following her around. And because of her lack of ability, she would just fall, or maybe it was the sand, I don't know, but she would often fall. And the cool thing about this is every time she would fall, like with a smile on her face, she would just turn around like, Dad, I need some help. I can't get up on my own. Like, this sand, it's too thick, and I just can't do it. But the best part is this, is her dad was right behind her with a smile on his face. Not angry, not upset, but just was excited that he was be able to be there to pick her up, dust her off, and say, hey, let's try it again. And I thought to myself, man, that is the relationship we should have with God. That's the relationship we would have with God, that when we fall in the sand, when we're sinking in the water, that not we're scared to look back because we think we're going to get judged, we think we're going to get criticized, but we turn around and say, man, pick me up, God, because we know He loves us, and we know He's there for us. But what happens is so many of us, because of our view of God, we continue sinking in the water and we can continue sitting in the sand because we're scared of what He's going to say. We're scared to look back. We're scared to turn around. Even though He's there with open arms ready to pick us back up. I love that in verse 31. Before Jesus says a word, He reaches out and saves him first. You know, He could have said, hey, figure out how to do it on your own. Learn how to do it on your own. You got yourself in this mess. But He didn't say anything. He reaches out, He saves him and says, hey, let's try this again. I don't know where some of you are this morning in your lives. Maybe you find yourself sinking in that water. Maybe you find yourself sitting in the sand and you don't know how you got there. All you know is you need help and you can't get up on your own. Man, I pray like Peter, you reach out and you say, Lord, save me. Because what I can promise you is this. God isn't here to judge you. God isn't here to say what a mess up you've been, what a screw up you are. God's here to say, I love you and I want to help you. Let me show you how amazing this life can be when you fully trust in me. Some of you in here maybe don't have a hope in Jesus yet. I hope we can show you what a hope in Jesus is all about. One of the cool things about the video we had is when we said the word church. Outside, the number one response by far was family, and that's what we have here. We have a church family. And if you're struggling with something, you're going through something, we want to wrap our arms around you. We want to help you. We want to start the healing process. We want to pray for you. Maybe someone in here is ready to be baptized, ready to commit their lives to Christ. Man, we would love to help you in that way this morning. Maybe you're struggling, you're sinking the waters, and we can help you. We're going to have some shepherds in the back. I'll be up here front. Some of our shepherds will be up front. Wherever you want to meet us, we're here for you. Please come.